doctor decides to help an elderly millionaire patient in critical condition, but what she discovers when examining the body prompts her to call the police immediately. Before we dive into this incredible story, where are you watching us from? Write in the comments and share your most memorable moment with us after watching until the end. It was a quiet morning, with cloudy skies, a half-empty hospital, and the sound of soft footsteps in the hallways. Dr. Alice Montero entered the hospital ward with a notebook in her hands and a focused expression on her face. She was on call that day, but she asked to come in early. There was one name in particular that concerned her: Mrs. Rosario Salgado Torres. Alice was one of those doctors who did not let herself be carried away by routine. Even when she was tired, she looked people in the eye and listened patiently. She remembered the name of each patient, not because she had to, but because she always believed that medicine was, above all, a human endeavor. Mrs. Rosario was in room 217 in the special care unit. She was an elegant elderly lady with a reputation for being strong, clear-headed, and sweet, despite her illness, which was progressing day by day. She was the mother of Dr. Mauricio Torres. Just thinking about that name made Alice feel uneasy inside. Everyone in the hospital knew him and talked about him. It wasn't because he was brilliant, not at all. It was because he was the son of one of the most powerful families in the city. The Torres family had name, money, influence, and that was always enough for them. From the beginning of college, everyone knew Mauricio wouldn't have to work hard to get anything. He got into medical school on recommendation. He spent his college years just signing the attendance list. He never made an effort. The professors were easy on him. His classmates pretended not to notice. He became a resident at the hospital before many who had worked twice as hard. He wore a clean lab coat, drove an imported car, and had the same look on his face as if he thought he was doing the world a favor just by showing up. Alice, on the other hand, came from a different reality. The daughter of a teacher and a truck driver, she fought for every point on her exams. She did her internship at a public hospital. She worked in communities. She knew real pain. Seeing someone like Mauricio wearing a white coat as if it were a luxury accessory hurt. But she took a deep breath and carried on, because the patients came first. That morning, when she stepped into the elevator, she thought of Doña Rosario. She knew her condition was delicate, terminal, but still lucid, still present. What Alice wanted was to make sure she was well cared for, that she didn't suffer unnecessarily, that she had dignity. The VIP wing was different from the rest of the hospital, quieter, with new armchairs and the smell of flowers. When Alice reached the door of 217, she took a deep breath and knocked softly. Doña Rosario, excuse me, I'm Dr. Alice. On the other side, a weak but friendly voice replied, "Come in, dear." The scene was beautiful, in a sad way. Rosario was lying down, well-groomed, her hair combed, a flowered bedspread. Around her were framed photos, old portraits, smiles frozen in time. There was a particularly large photo of Rosario, young, with a child in her arms. It was Mauricio. Alice approached slowly and took her hand gently. "How are you feeling today, ma'am?" Rosario smiled weakly. "I've had worse days and better days." Alice sat down next to her, opened her notebook, and began asking some routine questions. But as she spoke, she looked at the details around her. There were little notes stuck to the wall, written in large letters, in a man's handwriting. "You are my queen, Mom. I won't leave you alone. This will pass soon. I love you." Alice read that with a lump in her throat. For the first time, she felt something different about Mauricio. Maybe, just maybe, there was a side to him she didn't know yet. But it wasn't time to judge or imagine. It was time to care, to listen. And even though there were mornings when she could barely lift her head, she made an effort to put on a little light lipstick. Silly vanity. "But it helps me remember who I am," she would say with a little smile. Rosario was one of those people who face time with dignity. Cancer, diagnosed long ago, the kind that wears you down little by little, as if your body were melting from the inside. They had tried everything: chemotherapy, experimental medicine, hospitalizations, and more hospitalizations. Now there was no talk of a cure, only of comfort. but no one saw her as someone who was giving up. There was a firmness in the way she spoke, an elegance even in the simplest gestures, such as adjusting the sheet, lifting her teacup, scratching her chin with the back of her hand. She did everything with a delicacy that seemed rehearsed, as if each movement were still part of an ancient dance, and Mauricio was almost always by her side. It was common to see him sitting in the armchair next to the bed in a suit, even though he was in the hospital using his cell phone, but always saying he was there. He would arrive with flowers, bring magazines, ask if she liked the food. "Mom, I brought that juice you like. Are you comfortable with your head up like that? Would you like me to read something to you?" In the eyes of others, he was the picture of the attentive, devoted, loving son. "My son is my pride and joy," she would say quietly when someone praised him. "He's always been my little boy." The two had a reserved way of loving each other. Rosario wasn't one for long hugs. Mauricio wasn't one for crying either. But there was a look between them that said a lot, a code only they understood, a silence that seemed full of unspoken words. Sometimes Alice would walk into the room and find them like that, Rosario with her hand on Mauricio's, both of them silent, staring into space as if trying to stop time. Doña Rosario called out in a broken voice, "He takes care of me too. My boy has never left me alone." Mauricio smiled without saying anything. He just stood there, and in front of everyone he was a good son, one of those who don't run away, who stay until the end. But inside, something bothered Alice. Maybe it was the automatic way he repeated certain phrases, or the way he always seemed busy. Even though he was there, no one could deny it. He was present almost every day, during shift changes on weekends, even in the early hours of the morning. Rosario spoke proudly, and the whole hospital saw it. Mauricio Torres was the son who didn't abandon his mother. Days later, Alice opened the door to the room slowly, as if entering the house of someone who was asleep. It was late afternoon. The sunlight came in sideways through the window, gently illuminating the embroidered bedspread. The smell was sweet, mixed with lavender and a soft, grandmotherly perfume. Doña Rosario's room did not look like a hospital room. It looked like a room full of memories. Alice entered slowly, taking in the place. It was not just a room, it was a piece of life. On the nightstand next to the bed were more details. An open Bible, a rosary with white beads, a hand-embroidered handkerchief, and many little pieces of paper everywhere, some stuck to the wall, others tucked between books or taped to the window frame. Rosario was lying down, her eyes closed, breathing calmly. When she sensed someone's presence, she slowly opened her eyes. "Doctor, it's so good to see you." Alice smiled, pulled up a chair, and sat down next to the bed. "I just came to take a quick look to see if everything is okay here." Rosario turned her face slightly, as if proudly showing off her space. "It's my little corner. I asked them to bring some things from my house. I don't like the hospital being so white." Alice nodded. She looked around again. Everything there smelled of history. Her son left several very nice little notes. "He comes by every day." Rosario nodded, but her gaze shifted quickly for a second. It was almost imperceptible. "He tries. He does what he can." There was a silence. He's doing what he thinks is right. Alice frowned slightly, leaning forward carefully without rushing. "Do you feel that everything is okay? That he's really helping you?" Rosario closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. When she opened them, she had a distant look, as if she were remembering something she would rather forget. "Mauricio is my son. He loves me. He has always been my boy. Only he is tired. This, all of this, would tire anyone." Alice said nothing, just took her hand, and in that gesture she felt something different. Rosario's hand squeezed tightly, with an almost desperate force, her skin trembling slightly, and although she said no more, it spoke volumes. Alice waited another moment in silence, respecting her time, but something began to bother her in her chest. It was as if behind that elegant woman there was a cry for help that no one had heard yet. Rosario let go of her hand and looked out the window again. "I'm sorry, doctor, I got sentimental. Sometimes I get a little confused like that." Alice shook her head gently. "You don't have to apologize for feeling, Doña Rosario." They stayed there for a few more minutes. The afternoon light was almost gone, and in Alice's heart, a small, quiet, but real doubt began to grow. Something about that handshake, that pause, that incomplete sentence. It didn't seem like just tiredness. It was already the end of her shift. It was past 7 p.m. Alice sat down in the doctor's lounge, threw her gown on the chair, and opened her computer. She still had reports to review. She was tired, but Doña Rosario's name kept running through her head like a beacon. There was something there that had been weighing on her mind since the last visit. She opened the file, tests, notes, vital signs. Everything seemed to be in order, but when she compared the dates and times of the medications, something caught her attention. A small detail, a dose of sedative recorded twice in the same shift, only a few minutes apart. She frowned again and slowly lowered the screen. Another day, the same thing, a medication that, according to protocol, should only be given once a day. It appeared twice at different times, but without any explanation. Alice leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. It didn't make sense. She knew the palliative care protocol. Nothing was given extra without reason, and Rosario was not in crisis, at least not officially. She opened the nursing report and read it calmly, line by line. 1 dose of morphine in the afternoon, but the same dose was already recorded in the previous shift's report. And elsewhere, a note. Patient, very drowsy, but stable. Alice scratched her head uncomfortably. It was as if they wanted to force a state of calm, as if they wanted Rosario to sleep all the time. She opened the clinical progress charts. Her vital signs were rising and falling more than normal. Blood pressure spikes, rapid drops in heart rate, but no one had marked it as an alarm. No nurse, no other doctor felt a chill. She grabbed a sheet of paper and began to write down dates, times, medications, names of staff. The more she wrote, the more her stomach churned. The doses did not follow the pattern. Some did not even make sense for the patient's current condition. She took a deep breath, closed the computer, and stood there staring into space. She was sure something was wrong, but she still didn't know what. She only knew one thing. This couldn't just be a mistake. The next day, Alice arrived earlier than usual. Her face was serious, her gaze downcast, and she was carrying her notebook. But this time, it wasn't just routine. There was a sense of unease, and she knew she had to listen, observe, and ask questions without making it seem like an interrogation. It was a very delicate matter. In the nurse's break room, the smell of strong coffee filled the air. 2 workers were talking quietly as they prepared trays of medication. Alice entered carefully and approached slowly. "Good morning, guys. Can I interrupt for a moment?" They both smiled slightly. They already knew Alice. They knew she didn't talk just for the sake of talking. Sure, there's only one nurse he lets get close to him. Go figure why. The other younger nurse added, "I thought it was strange, too. Sometimes we go to check her vital signs, and they're already all written down by him. But sometimes, she seems more subdued than usual. Do you understand?" Very sleepy. Alice remained silent for a few seconds. She felt her heart racing. She didn't want to believe that it could mean what she was imagining. And he records everything correctly. Carlos took a deep breath. Most of the time, yes. But there are times when we only see the record afterwards. I mean, it shows up in the system, but no one saw him do it. Alice nodded her thanks. She was truly grateful. Her voice came out lower. "Thank you. Really. I just needed to understand better." She left the room slowly, her head spinning. Each step down the hallway felt heavier. What she heard there was not proof of anything, but it further ignited the alarm that was already burning inside her. Mauricio was always by his mother's side, but what if that care was more than it seemed? It was a gray Sunday. Alice was on duty. The hallways were half empty, footsteps echoing on the cold floor. As she reviewed the files in the special care area, she noticed that Mauricio's name was not scheduled for that day. For the first time in weeks, he would not be coming to care for his mother. Alice felt her heart beat faster. It was the opportunity she needed. She walked decisively to room 217. She knocked softly, as she always did, and entered. "Good morning, Mrs. Rosario. I came to check on you. Just for a minute. Is that okay?" Rosario was lying down with her eyes open, but her gaze was lost. The sunlight filtering through the curtain bathed the room in yellow tones. There was silence, and an air of weariness. "It's okay, dear. Come in." Alice washed her hands, put on her gloves, and approached carefully. She began the routine examination, paying attention to every detail. When she lifted the sleeve of her pajamas, she froze for a second. There were bruises on her left arm, not one or two, but several, in places where medication is normally applied. Purple spots of different sizes, some already yellowing, others still dark. Alice felt her breathing become heavy. She touched her face. She continued with the examination. She checked her eyes and lips. They were very dry. She touched the cold skin with little elasticity, clear signs of dehydration, but the report said she was stable with adequate hydration. "Doña Rosario, are you drinking enough water?" Rosario hesitated. She looked down. "When I remember, sometimes I'm not thirsty." Alice picked up the stethoscope with trembling hands. She tried to stay calm, but inside, her heart was racing. She finished the exam, stepped back a little, and pulled up a chair to sit next to the bed. "You have some bruises on your arm. Do you remember if you hit yourself somewhere?" Rosario looked away. She blinked slowly. "Sometimes my arm slips when they move me. It's nothing." Alice took her hand affectionately and squeezed it gently. "You can tell me anything. That's why I'm here, really." Then Rosario slowly turned her face and looked into Alice's eyes. Her eyes were glassy, but without tears, as if she were holding an entire world inside her chest. She squeezed Alice's hand tightly, really tightly, and in an almost voiceless whisper, she said, "Protect Mauricio. He just wants to help." Alice felt a lump in her throat and stood still, not knowing if it was sadness, fear, or anger. That phrase, that request, was loaded with a love that hurt, as if Rosario knew but didn't want to accept it, as if she would rather be hurt than see her son hurt. And at that moment, in that heavy silence between the two of them, Alice understood that something serious was happening, and that Rosario just wanted to protect the one she loved most, even if it cost her her life. Alice left the room with her heart broken. In the lab, she filled out the forms with trembling hands. She requested a series of more detailed tests: blood, urine, liver function, toxicology, anything that could provide clarity. She didn't tell anyone. She knew that any false move could raise suspicions and close doors. Alice left the paper on the table, brought her hand to her face, and closed her eyes. My God, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a system failure. She was being given these on purpose. Someone was giving these to Rosario over and over again. The hardest part wasn't understanding what it meant, it was accepting it. She got up slowly, walked to the window, and looked outside. The sky was cloudy and heavy, just like her. She felt a whirlwind in her chest. Anger, sadness, fear. Rosario wasn't just sick, they were slowly and quietly killing her, and someone thought that was helping. Alice left the room carrying the test results in her hands, as if they were made of lead. The hallway seemed longer than ever. Each step made her head spin. Inside, everything was mixed up. Anger, sadness, disbelief. She stood in an empty corner of the hospital, leaned against the cold wall, and stayed there, breathing deeply. She didn't want to believe it. She couldn't. Mauricio, of all people, was hard to accept. Mauricio had always been seen as the perfect son, attentive, loving. He was always by his mother's side, holding her hand, bringing her flowers, writing little notes. He was the one who cried the most when they talked about the end, the one who insisted on sleeping in the hospital when she was feeling bad. He was the one who hugged Rosario as if she were the most precious thing in his life. Everyone saw that. Everyone said so. That's a real son. If only everyone were like Dr. Mauricio. He loves his mother so much, it shows. Alice heard that all the time. Even she believed it for a while. But now, with those studies in hand, everything seemed false, as if she had been watching a play and only now realized that she was sitting in the front row of a lie. She remembered how Rosario spoke of him with such love, but also with a little fear, as if she didn't know how to protect him, even from himself. Alice sat down on a wooden bench, looked at the floor, and felt like crying, not only because of what she was discovering, but because of what it meant. How could someone who claims to love do something like this? Nothing made sense. Nothing. She took out her cell phone, and opened Mauricio's contact. His name glowed on the screen. Dr. Mauricio Torres. So respected, so admired, and now carrying a heavy, dark secret. Alice didn't know what to do, but she knew one thing. After that, she could no longer pretend she hadn't seen it. And that pain, that doubt, was just beginning. It was the end of the shift. The hospital was quieter now. Some lights in the hallways were off, and the sound of heart monitors in the background gave off that cold rhythm of hospital nights. Alice, still affected by everything she had discovered, felt that a piece was missing, something that would connect Rosario's feelings with the evidence that was beginning to come together. She decided to return to room 217. When she entered, Doña Rosario was asleep, a light sleep, with slow, heavy breathing. Alice looked at her with affection and pain at the same time. This woman, so full of history, so full of silence, kept more than she should have. She went to the small dresser next to the bed. There was a worn leather bag, well cared for. Rosario had always loved her things, the ones that held memories. Alice opened it carefully, feeling like she was entering a sacred place. Inside, among handkerchiefs, a picture frame, and a small bottle of perfume, she found a small notebook with a light blue cover and worn edges. A diary. Alice hesitated, but she knew that understanding what Rosario was feeling might be the only way to save her. She opened it in the middle, running her fingers through the pages. The writing was small, carefully written, simple words, deep feelings. Today, he brought me soup. I couldn't eat. He said I didn't have to force myself anymore, that it was okay. Sometimes I lie awake in the early hours of the morning. Doña Rosario's words, written with such sweetness and fear, would not leave her head. Her heart felt tight, as if she were betraying someone by seeking the truth, even though she knew it was the right thing to do. The next morning, she gathered her courage and went to the doctor's break room. Mauricio was sitting there in one of the armchairs with his head down, looking at his cell phone. He was wearing his usual clean gown, his hair combed, his expression serious. Alice entered slowly with firm steps and took a deep breath. "Hello, Mauricio. Can I talk to you for a minute?" He looked up slowly and nodded, but without smiling. "Sure, Alice, go ahead." She sat down across from him, clutching the journal as if it were a secret about to explode. "I was reviewing your mom's tests and medication records. There are some things that don't add up, Mauricio." He was silent for a few seconds. Then he rested his elbows on his knees and looked at her with a cold stare, almost without blinking. "And what exactly do you mean by that?" Alice felt the tension rising, but she remained calm. "I'm just concerned. The levels of sedative in her body, the physical reactions, don't match the reports. I need to understand what's going on." Mauricio became even more serious, pressed his lips together, and then said, "No one knows my mom better than I do." The sentence was dry, hard, like a wall between them. Alice swallowed. "I believe you love her very much, but that care can't override what is safe." He crossed his arms. His gaze remained firm. "My mom isn't suffering, I assure you. I don't want her to feel pain, that's all." Alice looked at him for a few seconds, trying to understand what was behind that coldness. Was it fear? Guilt? Too much love? Or all of those things together? Sometimes what we think is caring can hurt, Mauricio. He didn't answer, just looked away like someone carrying something very heavy and no longer knowing how to hold it. Alice got up slowly. She didn't want to turn this into a fight, but she couldn't keep pretending she didn't see anything either. She left the room with her heart broken, and with the certainty that love, when it suffocates, ceases to be love. Mauricio's words wouldn't leave Alice's head. "No one knows my mom better than I do." There was something behind that. It wasn't just a defense. It was as if he was carrying a pain that no one else could see. And Alice, although she was afraid of what she might find, felt she had to understand, to know who this man, whom everyone saw as a model son, really was. She began by asking quietly in the hallways, without making a fuss, a comment here, another there, until an elderly nurse who had known Mauricio since he was a resident said something that made everything stop. "You knew he was married, right? He lost his wife. It was a terrible blow. He was never the same again." Alice's eyes widened. No, she didn't know that. She thanked her, pretended not to be interested, But inside, she already felt the urge to know more. That same night, when she got home, she turned on her computer and started searching. She used his full name, dates, medical associations, old social networks. It took a while, but she found something. A news story from 6 years ago. Small, discreet, young woman dies after post-operative complications. The photo of the woman smiling, brown hair, lively eyes, and next to her, Mauricio, younger, with a big smile, hugging her. Her name was Elisa Martins Torres, also a doctor. Newlyweds at the time, Alice clicked on the article. There weren't many details, only that Elisa had undergone a simple surgery and after that had unexpected reactions, organ failure within a few days. The investigation was closed due to lack of evidence of negligence. But in one of the comments on the article, a phrase caught Alice's attention. He was devastated. He said he should have done something, that he couldn't let it happen again. Alice felt a chill. She continued searching on social media. She found a deactivated profile, but it still had old posts. Mauricio wrote a lot about his wife, statements, memories, tributes. But what caught her attention the most, in a cafe near the hospital, Alice met with an old college friend of Mauricio's. Dr. Andre, an experienced physician, now worked in another city. Alice had gotten his contact information from a nurse at the old hospital. She told him it was important. Andre arrived on time, looking curious. "You said it was about Mauricio, right? I haven't heard that name in a long time." Alice nodded, not quite sure where to start. "I'm taking care of his mother, and there are some things that worry me. Not about her exactly, but about him. You were his friend, weren't you?" Andre leaned back in his chair, looked out the window for a few seconds, and then spoke as if he were bringing up something he had kept to himself for a long time. "Mauricio was a different person before Elisa. He was kind of distracted, you know? He was always there doing what he had to do, but without much passion. He wasn't bad. He just didn't get involved much." Alice listened quietly, her heart beating fast. But after he married Elisa, he changed. She was the opposite of him. Intense, affectionate, the kind who cries for a patient, who hugs family members. She pulled him toward that more human side, and he went with her. He became calmer. It was nice to see, to be honest. Alice smiled a little, but Andres' face became serious again. Her death destroyed him. She had never seen Mauricio like that. He shut himself off. He spent hours at the hospital, even when he wasn't on call. He wanted to review protocols, redo old reports. He started saying that doctors fail by omission, that we let people die because we're afraid to go further. Alice felt a lump in her throat. Beyond. Yes, he said that if he had done more, if he had tried something out of the ordinary, maybe she would have survived. That following too many rules had killed the love of his life, and he began to repeat, never again will I lose someone by waiting too long." Andres sighed deeply and looked into Alice's eyes. Since then, he became the man you surely know today. The doctor who is always there, the attentive son, but inside he is trying to fix a guilt he could never avoid. Elise remained silent. Across the table, she held back a tear that wanted to fall. Now she saw him more clearly. Mauricio was not just a suffering doctor. He was a man trying to prevent the past from repeating itself, even if it cost him the present, even if it hurt those he loved most. It was around 2 a.m. The hospital was silent. Only the monitors and the slow footsteps of those on duty could be heard. Alice was about to leave the medicine room when the central alarm sounded. Room 217. Alice ran. Upon entering the room, she saw Rosario gasping for air. Her chest rose and fell with effort, her fetre pill and her lips dry, her eyes wide with fear. One of the machines was beeping rapidly. Alice didn't think twice. "Doña Rosario, it's me. Breathe with me." "Yes," slowly. "Everything is fine. I'm here." With steady hands, she adjusted the oxygen, checked the IV, and called the nursing technician. They acted quickly. In a few minutes, her heartbeat normalized and her breathing became less labored. Rosario tried to say something, but couldn't. She just clutched the sheets tightly. Calm down. Calm down. It's over. Are you sure? I'm here with you." "Yes." While the nurse checked her vital signs, Alice began to examine Rosario's body more carefully, and that's when she saw it. On her left arm, near the crease where there were old marks and bruises, there was a recent needle mark. Red, a small swelling, still fresh. Alice felt a chill inside. Looked at the electronic file open on the tablet next to the bed. No medication recorded that night. No procedure. No note of intravenous administration. Nothing. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She lifted the sheet carefully, went to the trash can in the room, and checked. She found an empty bottle of sedative hidden at the bottom, wrapped in a tissue. She turned to look at Rosario, who was now sleeping exhausted, her face sweaty and her eyes half closed. It was as if she had fought and lost a little more of herself. At 1:47, the hallway camera captured an image. Mauricio, his hair messy, a robe over a sweatshirt, walked slowly, looking from side to side. In his hands was a small box. Alice put her hand to her mouth. She felt her legs tremble. He stood in front of her mother's door, looked at the camera for a second, then went in and disappeared for 7 minutes. When he came out, he had the empty box open and a calm face, as if nothing had happened. Alice didn't need any more, but there was still more. At the shift change, she called Carlos, the nurse from earlier, for a private chat. "Carlos, tell me something. Did you see Dr. Maurizio last night in the early hours?" He fell silent, looked around, then lowered his voice. "Doctor, yes, I saw him. He was in Mrs. Rosario's room. I wasn't going to say anything, but I saw him leave and go straight to the waste storage room. I went after him. There were bottles of sedatives in the regular trash. They weren't even in the red bags. They were hidden among the IV bags." Alice closed her eyes for a moment. She felt dizzy. "Are you sure?" Carlos nodded seriously. "Yes, and I also saw him delete the application record from the system. I thought it was strange, but he's the son, right? Who's going to doubt him?" Alice remained silent. Her chest hurt. The lump in her throat rose slowly. It was no longer just a suspicion. It was real, and she had to decide what to do about it. Alice carried the papers in a tightly closed brown folder. She walked down the hallway with steady steps, but inside, she was trembling. Every heartbeat echoed in her chest. She arrived at the medical director's office and knocked gently on the door. "Come in, doctor," said the director. He was a gray-haired man, experienced and respected by all. She sat down and placed the folder on the table. "I need to show you something, and I need you to take it seriously." Calmly, she took out the documents. First the tests, then the inconsistent reports, then the camera images, and finally the nurse's testimony. The director read slowly, line by line. The silence in the room was heavy. Alice could hardly breathe. When he finished, he closed the folder and remained silent for a moment. Then he folded his hands on the table. "Dr. Alice, what you have brought here is serious. Very serious. But for now, it's circumstantial evidence. No clear proof." Alice frowned. Her voice trembled. "You saw the images. He enters with the syringe, the mark on the patient's arm, the sedatives, the hidden vial. Yes, I saw them, and I understand your concern, but if this becomes a formal complaint now, without clear confirmation, it could destroy Dr. Mauricio's career without being sure. It could ruin his image forever, just because of doubts and ideas." Alice was silent. She felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. It wasn't for her. It was for Rosario, for someone who was being silenced little by little, under the guise of love. "What do you suggest?" The director took a deep breath. "That we be careful, continue to observe, document everything in great detail. But for now, let's keep this confidential. If we act quickly, it could cause a scandal that affects many people. And if it's a misunderstanding, but if it's not, we'll have all the clear evidence." Alice got up slowly. She was disappointed, not in him, but in the world, in the system, in that habit of protecting names, even when lives are at risk. "I understand," she whispered. "But if anything happens to her, doctor, I'll never forgive myself for staying silent." She left the office with tears in her eyes. The pain of knowing and not being able to act as she wanted hurt more than anything else. Now more than ever, she knew. She was alone in this, but she wasn't going to give up. It was a heavy dawn. The sky outside looked darker than usual. The hospital lights cast long shadows in the empty corridors. Alice couldn't sleep. She felt something in her chest, as if something were about to happen. so she decided to walk to the special area. The silence there always said more than any conversation. Alice didn't see what it was, but that was enough. An impulse came over her. Without thinking, she turned on her heels and ran down the hall. She went straight to the reception desk, her hands shaking. She picked up the phone and dialed. "Police. Emergency." The operator's voice came on the other end. "Good evening. How can I help you?" Alice closed her eyes for a second. She held back the urge to cry. "I'm a doctor. I'm in a hospital and I have serious reasons to believe that a patient is in danger. Her name is Rosario Salgado, and I need help." Now she knew what that meant. She knew she could lose the respect of her colleagues, the trust of management, maybe even her career. But she couldn't just stand by, because loving someone also means having the courage to protect them, even when that means confronting someone you don't want to hurt. The atmosphere in the hospital was different. Tense, closed off. No one wanted to make eye contact in the hallways. Whispers filled the empty spaces. The news had spread quickly. The police had come, and Mauricio's name was at the center of it all. They called him into a separate room, away from the noise. 2 investigators were waiting for him, serious, ready to begin. Alice wasn't there, but she found out everything from colleagues who watched from afar. Even so, she felt the weight as if she were inside. Mauricio entered the room with a sad face, red eyes, and slumped shoulders. He sat down slowly, not looking at anyone. "Dr. Mauricio," one of the investigators began, "we need to talk about the care you gave your mother. There are discrepancies in the records, camera footage, and employee testimonies. Do you understand how serious this is?" He was silent for a few seconds, then looked up with a calmness that seemed like pure exhaustion. "I understand, but you're looking at this the wrong way." The other investigator crossed his arms. "Do you confirm that you gave medication outside of the medical protocol?" Mauricio sighed. He looked down at the table. His voice was low but firm. "Yes, but I didn't do it with bad intentions. I just wanted to take away her pain. You have no idea what it's like to see someone you love slowly fade away." She didn't sleep well. She was in pain everywhere. She said she couldn't take it anymore. I just wanted her to be at peace. There was a heavy silence in the room. One of the agents calmly wrote everything down. The other looked at Mauricio intently. He thought that these actions could put his life at risk. Of course, but it's hard to explain. After Elisa died, I was left with this idea in my head that I had failed, that I hadn't done everything I could. I couldn't bear the thought of failing again, not with my mom, not with her. His eyes filled with tears, but he didn't cry. He just stood there staring into space. I never wanted to hurt anyone, never. I just didn't know what the right thing to do was anymore. I just wanted her to stop suffering. The room fell silent again, a silence that doesn't judge but weighs heavily. Mauricio was guilty, yes, but at the same time he was a lost son, a man who wanted to protect the one he loved and who made a mistake along the way. When they told Doña Rosario the truth, she was silent for a moment that seemed like an eternity. Sitting on the bed, her hands folded in her lap, she just listened, her eyes fixed on a random spot on the wall. She didn't blink. She didn't react. It was as if her body had frozen, as if her heart no longer had the strength to beat. Only when they told her that Mauricio had been interrogated did she break down. Her shoulders began to shake slowly. Then the crying came like a heavy rain, the kind you can't stop. Her breath caught, her lips trembled, and her eyes filled with pain. Not anger, not fear, but pain. Alice was sitting next to her with a handkerchief in her hands. She tried to comfort her, but Rosario stopped her with a gentle gesture. "No, please," she said between sobs. "Don't let them do anything to my son." Alice held back her tears. "Doña Rosario, I understand, but what he did, he just wanted to protect me." Rosario interrupted, her voice breaking. "He loves me. I only ask you," Rosario continued in a whisper, "don't take everything away from her. You've already taken too much. He only wanted what was best for me. Even though she was wrong, she only wanted to save me." And at that moment, there in that hospital room, there was no good or bad, only a mother pleading for her child. The report arrived on a cloudy Friday, one of those days when the sky seems to know everything before you do. Alice opened the envelope alone, sitting in the same room where it had all begun. The folder trembled in her hands, as if what was inside weighed more than normal. The pages were stapled together with the laboratory's stamp in the upper corner. She read slowly, one line at a time, complete toxicological analysis. And there, among numbers and technical words, came the confirmation she feared most: a cocktail of sedatives. It wasn't just one, it was several, mixed together in a way that, although they seemed harmless in small doses, together could be dangerous, very dangerous. And they were all in Doña Rosario's body, excessive amounts of strong painkillers, substances that, if used without control, can affect the heart rate, breathing, and consciousness. Substances that explained her vacant stare, her weak body, her confusion, substances that had never been prescribed by anyone. Alice let the paper fall onto the table. She stood there in silence. Her heart was beating slowly but heavily, as if each beat were a blow to her chest. Outside, someone was pushing a stretcher down the hallway. Normal hospital sounds. But in that room, everything seemed to have stopped. She thought of Rosario, that elegant, steadfast lady who still held her hand gently. She thought of the little pieces of paper stuck to the wall, of the eyes that asked for help, even though the mouth said otherwise. She also thought of Mauricio, the son she loved too much, who confused care with control, love with fear, the man who, in trying to stop the pain, almost caused the worst. The report was clear. The numbers didn't lie. Now it was no longer just a suspicion. It was the truth. Cold, hard, painful. Rosario was alive, but Mauricio was almost called in for a final conversation, this time without the police, without formalities, just him and Alice. It was the end of a long road, full of silence and lies. He entered the room slowly, his eyes sunken, dark circles under them, his body visibly thinner. He sat down in front of her without saying a word. Alice placed the toxicology report on the table. There was no need to explain. He already knew. They remained silent for a few seconds, until Alice spoke in a low but firm voice. "Why, Mauricio?" He ran his hands over his face as if trying to erase his own mistakes. He took a deep breath and then finally let it all out. He couldn't stand to see her like that anymore. So small, so dull. "That wasn't my mom, Alice. It wasn't." His voice trembled. "I thought that if I slept more, if I didn't feel so much, maybe it would be better for her, for me. I just didn't want her to suffer." Alice pressed her lips together. She felt a heat rising to her face. It was anger, but also pity and sadness. A sadness that hurt, the kind you don't know where it begins or where it ends. "But you crossed the line," she said, her voice breaking. "You were hurting her, even if you didn't mean to. Hasten an end that was not yet hers." He lowered his head, his eyes filled with tears, too weak to defend himself. "I thought I was saving her in some way, saving her from living like Elisa died, in pain, in fear, out of control. I didn't want that again." Alice got up slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the morning was beginning to dawn. A timid light entered the room. She turned around with her eyes full. Loving is not controlling, Mauricio. Loving is enduring together. It's being there. She just stood there with her hands folded, looking at the man who used to walk the halls as if he owned the place. Now, he looked like a lost child. Mauricio entered, listened to the decision with his head bowed, asked no questions, made no complaints, just nodded with his eyes fixed on the floor. "Dr. Maurizio," said the director in a restrained tone, "this measure is not a punishment. It is to protect everyone, including you. You need help." The word hung in the air. Help. It was then that he finally looked up for the first time, not with arrogance but with a deep human pain. "I know," he murmured. "I haven't been well for a long time." He left the room accompanied by a staff member without looking back, his coat folded in his arms, his steps slow, as if each step cost him a great deal. Alice, still standing, stared through the half-open door until he disappeared into the hallway. In the days that followed, she learned that Mauricio had begun a psychiatric evaluation process. He was being accompanied by a team of specialists, away from any clinical contact. He was going to stay away from everything for a while, and perhaps away from himself. It wasn't punishment, it was an opportunity, because sometimes what someone else needs is to stop and find themselves, To understand that loving someone isn't about avoiding pain at all costs. It's about staying, even when everything inside you tells you to run away. After all, room 217 seemed different, not because of the furniture or the walls. Those remained the same, but the air inside felt lighter, as if there were finally room to breathe, truly, without fear, without secrets. Alice began to visit Doña Rosario every day. Even though she had very busy shifts, she always found a way. She entered the room slowly, as she always did, and smiled with her eyes. "Good morning, Doña Rosario. How are you feeling today?" Rosario no longer smiled as brightly as she used to, but she smiled, and that was enough. With Mauricio's departure, it was Alice's turn to take care of her, but she didn't do it out of obligation. She did it out of love, out of respect, and above all, out of gratitude. The first morning after Mauricio left, Alice pulled up a chair, sat down next to the bed, and took Rosario's hands. They were cold, but firm, as if, although fragile, she still had a lot of strength inside her. "Doña Rosario, I want to make you a promise," Alice said, her voice breaking. "I will take care of you calmly, patiently, truthfully, day by day, without rushing, without exaggerating, and with all the respect you deserve." Rosario closed her eyes for a second, took a deep breath, and when she opened them, there were tears on her eyelashes. She said nothing, just squeezed Alice's hand gently, as if to say, "Thank you," without speaking. That week, Alice organized the medication routine more carefully. She talked to the nurses, checked each dose, asked Rosario how she was feeling, listened to her carefully, and above all, left room for silence, because sometimes the greatest care is just being there. She brought a radio into the room. She played quiet music in the mornings. Sometimes she read bits of books aloud. Other times, she just sat watching the sun come in through the curtain, like someone who knows that company also heals. Caring became a simple, repeated gesture, but one full of love. And day after day, Rosario began to breathe more calmly, because now she no longer had to feign strength or hide her fear. She just had to let herself be cared for with respect and truth. It was a quiet afternoon, with the golden sky shining through the cracks in the window. The radio played softly, playing an old song, and the sound seemed to embrace the silence with affection. Alice was sitting next to Rosario's bed, writing some things down in a notebook, when she heard a weak but clear voice. "Doctor, can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" Alice closed the notebook slowly. She looked at her tenderly. "Of course, Doña Rosario. Tell me." Rosario looked at the ceiling for a moment, then turned her gaze to the window as if talking to her memories. "When I was young, very young, I painted. I painted a lot." Alice felt a lump in her throat, and never again, truly, never, not even once, because if I picked them up again, I would want to stay, and I couldn't. I had to take care of the company, my son, the whole world, except myself. Alice took her hand gently, her eyes already filled with tears. "You did so much for everyone." Rosario turned and looked at Alice sweetly. "You leave little pieces of yourself behind along the way, sometimes without even realizing it, but they stay there, hidden, silent." Alice remained silent, and there, in that simple moment, she realized the magnitude of this woman's life, how many things she had left behind, how many dreams she had kept to herself, how many times she had said yes to others and no to herself. She wasn't just a patient. She was an entire universe that had learned to remain silent. And now, finally, someone was listening to her. Mauricio's house was in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by trees and high walls. From the outside, everything looked perfect. A manicured lawn, an automatic gate, an elegant facade. But inside, the silence was heavy. It seemed as if time had stopped there. Alice arrived unannounced. She was carrying a small box with simple wrapping. She rang the doorbell once, then again. The door opened slowly. Mauricio appeared, his face pale, with an unshaven beard and sunken eyes. He looked different, smaller, as if he had shrunk. "Oh," he murmured, "I thought you never wanted to see me again." She smiled a little, with a calm look. I thought maybe you needed someone who wasn't there to judge you." He stepped aside, and she entered. The room was dimly lit. In one corner, a blanket lay on the couch, a few empty water bottles, books everywhere. The air smelled of exhaustion. They sat across from each other. For a while they said nothing until Mauricio broke the silence. "I'm trying to understand everything, to go over every step, every decision, but you know what hurts the most?" Alice just looked at him patiently. "It hurts to know that I did that, thinking it was love, thinking I was saving her, but in reality I was just trying to escape." He swallowed hard. He couldn't bear the idea of losing someone again, of seeing the person who loved him most in this world slowly slipping away while he stood by, unable to do anything. Alice took a deep breath. Then she said in a low, firm voice, full of truth, "Maurizio, to love is also to let go, but letting go with dignity, with calm, with presence, with true love, the kind that takes her hand and waits for time, not ours, but hers." Mauricio fell silent. His breathing began to falter. His eyes filled with tears. He tried to hold back, but he couldn't. He collapsed. He cried like a child with his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking, a loud, ugly, heavy, but liberating. Alice sat there without saying anything, letting him cry, because sometimes that's what someone needs. Someone who is just there, who listens, who doesn't leave. And at that moment, after years of hiding the pain, Mauricio finally began to feel, truly. Time passed slowly. How should it be? Doña Rosario slowly began to react. Her body was still fragile, but her eyes sparkled again. It was as if, with a weight lifted from her shoulders, she had found a new space within herself, a space of calm. Alice continued to care for her lovingly, but now something new appeared with each visit. A small box in the corner of the room with brushes, paints, and small canvases. "I decided to use my colors again, Doctor," Rosario said with a shy smile. "And I think that's the most beautiful thing you could have done," Alice replied, sitting down beside her. At first they were just scribbles, splashes of color. Then came the lines, the shapes, flowers, windows, silhouettes of trees, small paintings, full of emotion, full of life. Each painting was like a little piece of herself that she was recovering, a little of what she had kept hidden for years. When she saw the hallway filled with her own works, she put her hand to her mouth. "All this is for me." "Yes, it is," said Alice, her eyes filled with tears. "Because you still have so much to show." Rosario cried, but it was a beautiful cry, the kind that cleanses you inside. She cried as she hugged people, as she told the stories behind each painting, as she saw that even after everything, it was still possible to flourish. And there, among paintings, hugs, and sincere glances, she came back to life, full of color and peace. The exhibition remained calm, as if time had a different rhythm there. People stood in front of the paintings, smiled, and commented in low voices. The sound of the environment was soft, and Doña Rosario, sitting near the entrance, welcomed visitors with a sparkle in her eyes that no one had seen in a long time. Alice was at her side, talking to a group of nurses when the door to the room opened. Silence. Mauricio entered. He was wearing a simple shirt, his hair a little longer, his gaze restrained. He walked slowly, like someone carrying a stuck apology. No one said anything, but everyone felt it. The air seemed to stop for a moment. Rosario looked up and saw him. She stood still. He approached with heavy steps. When he stood in front of his mother, his eyes were already filled with tears. He tried to speak, but his voice wouldn't come out. He took a deep breath. "Mom, forgive me." The words came out softly, but everyone heard them. He knelt in front of her as if surrendering, as if he no longer had any defenses. "I did everything wrong, and even so, all I wanted was to protect you. But I hurt you without meaning to. But I hurt you, and if you still have a little bit of love for me, forgive me." Rosario brought her hand to her face. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. She didn't hesitate. She opened her arms, pulled her son close, and hugged him as she hadn't done in years. A long, strong hug, full of pain and healing. "My son, I never stopped loving you." And the two of them cried there in front of everyone. A true cry that was liberating, as if each tear washed away the remnants of resentment fear, guilt. Alice watched the scene with tears in her eyes, and in that moment she understood that forgiveness. It wasn't just theirs. It was everything, a whole lifetime. Time passed as it does for everyone, without warning. But this time, it passed calmly. Doña Rosario lived at home for a few more months, surrounded by plants, paintings, and a beautiful silence. Alice visited often, as did Mauricio. The two didn't talk much, but they learned to share the care, the space, the affection, without haste, without guilt. Rosario's health slowly faded, one day with more strength, another with more fatigue, but never with pain. It was as if her body had already understood that it was time to rest and was just waiting for the hearts of others to understand it too. That morning, the sky was clear. The open windows let in a warm breeze. Alice arranged the cushions on the armchair while Mauricio made tea. Rosario was lying down, covered up to her waist, with a light blue scarf in her hair and a peaceful look on her face. "Daughter," she said in a soft but firm voice. Alice approached and took her hand. "I'm here, Doña Rosario." She looked into the eyes of the two people who had shared her last days and smiled. "I'm ready." Mauricio approached, sat down next to the bed, and took her other hand. "We're with you, Mom." She slowly closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed, then became lighter, until it stopped. Even then, it was without fear, without pain, at home. At that moment, Alice and Mauricio said nothing. They just stayed there, each holding one of her hands. In silence, Rosario left as she deserved, with dignity, surrounded by love, and in peace. After Doña Rosario's departure, something changed inside Mauricio. Mauricio was no longer the distant doctor. He was the man who knew that sometimes the best care is just to be there, without trying to save, without trying to control, just being there. Alice, on the other hand, was not the same either. After everything she experienced with Rosario, she began to see the hospital with different eyes. She realized how routine, haste, and excessive protocols could destroy what was most human, and she decided that she had to change that. She created a humanization project, invited colleagues, nurses, psychologists, formed support groups, listening spaces, and meetings with families. She fought for care to be more than just technique, for it to be love. Medicine is not just science. It is presence. It is looking into the eyes. It is knowing when to be silent at the right moment, she said at the meetings. And so the two of them continued, changed, transformed by a story that began with pain, but found its way to healing. The gallery was almost empty that afternoon. Doña Rosario's exhibition was still on display, even though weeks had passed since her departure. A few people walked by, stopped, looked at the paintings, but without haste, as if they knew that this art was not just color, it was memory. Alice entered slowly, without telling anyone. She needed that moment alone. She walked through the corridors as if walking a path made of memories. Each painting was a window, a part of Rosario's soul placed there with delicacy and courage. Flowers, windows, sunsets. And then she stopped in front of the last painting. It was different from the others. It had less color, but more feeling. It was simple. A mother and son holding hands, sitting on a bench. There were no detailed faces, only silhouettes, but you could feel what was there. Love, forgiveness, peace. Alice stood still, looking. She felt a tightness in her chest, but she didn't cry. It was a good kind of pressure, the kind that doesn't hurt, it just reminds you. Doña Rosario had done it. She whispered. She left her mark. She healed more people than she could imagine. She moved a little closer and touched the plaque next to the painting with her fingertips. Last canvas. In the end, peace. Alice smiled with her eyes. That painting was more than just paint. It was the end of a cycle. It was proof that even when everything seems painful, there can still be beauty, that true love doesn't need perfection, just presence. And there, alone in that silent room, Alice understood that caring is an act of courage, and that loving is knowing how to let life go on with respect, in peace, with love. What would you do? Would you take a risk like Dr. Alice and report it? Or would you stay silent for the sake of family ties? Write your comments If you like the story, tap the like and subscribe buttons and share this story with your loved ones. Go to the recommended video on the screen. Another real hospital secret awaits you.